Sometimes life breaks you so completely that you stop recognizing the man in the mirror. Vaughn Ashcroft knew that feeling well. At 47, divorced and broke, watching his son slip further away with each passing day. Theo had moved back home after dropping out of college, but they were strangers under the same roof. The silence between them hurt more than any argument ever could. With his last few $100s, Vaughn made one final gamble at a storage auction, bidding on a sealed vault that once belonged to a missing billionaire. It was desperate and foolish, but when they opened it together, they found millions in treasure. More importantly, they found something they thought was lost forever: each other. What was hidden in that vault that changed everything? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The apartment smelled like burnt coffee and regret. Vaughn stood at the kitchen counter, staring at the stack of envelopes he'd been avoiding for 3 days. Red ink screamed from every corner. Final notice, past due, immediate action required. He'd become an expert at recognizing the different shades of urgency that creditors used. This morning's mail brought a new one, pale yellow with certified return receipt. That meant eviction proceedings had begun, 47 years old, and this is what he had to show for it. A 2-bedroom apartment in a building that smelled perpetually of cabbage and disappointment. A pickup truck with 200,000 miles and a transmission that ground like broken teeth. And a son who lived 15 feet away but might as well have been on another planet. Through the thin wall separating the kitchen from Theo's room, Vaughn could hear the low murmur of a video playing. His son had been in there since yesterday afternoon, emerging only to grab food and retreat back into his cave. 22 years old, brilliant enough to have earned a full scholarship to the state university, and now spending his days in a room that still had his high school baseball trophies gathering dust on the shelves. Vaughn poured the burnt coffee down the sink and started a fresh pot. His hands ached this morning, the kind of deep joint pain that came from 3 decades of carpentry work. He'd been swinging hammers since he was 19, building his own small contracting business by the time he was 30. Back then, he'd had steady work, a crew of reliable guys, and enough money to give his family a comfortable life. Then the recession hit. Then his wife got sick. Then everything that could fall apart did. The coffee maker gurgled and hissed. Vaughn pulled out his phone and scrolled through his email, hoping for responses to the dozen job inquiries he'd sent out last week. Nothing. The construction industry had no patience for aging carpenters who couldn't keep up with younger, cheaper labor. He'd been undercut on his last 4 bids by contractors, using crews of kids who worked twice as fast for half the price. His bank account showed $743. After rent, if he could stall the landlord another week, he'd have maybe $300 left. Enough for food if they were careful. Not enough for the utilities that were already overdue. A door opened. Theo emerged from his room, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt that had seen better days. His dark hair stood up in several directions, and his eyes had that glazed look that came from too many hours staring at screens. "Morning," Vaughn said. Theo grunted something that might have been a greeting and opened the refrigerator. He stood there for a long moment staring at the sparse contents. Eggs, half a loaf of bread, some wilted lettuce, condiments. Then he closed it without taking anything. "I can make eggs," Vaughn offered. "I'm not hungry." "You haven't eaten since yesterday." "Afternoon." I said I'm not hungry. Theo's voice carried an edge that had become familiar over the past 8 months since he'd moved back home. Not quite hostile, but defensive. Always defensive. Vaughn bit back the response that rose in his throat. They'd had this same conversation, in various forms, at least 50 times. It always ended the same way, with Theo retreating to his room and Vaughn standing alone, wondering where he'd lost his son. The truth was, he knew exactly when he'd lost him. 8 years ago, in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and dying flowers. Vaughn had been holding his wife's hand when she took her last breath, and when he'd looked up, Theo had been standing in the doorway, 14 years old, watching his mother slip away. Something in the boy's eyes had gone dark that day, and Vaughan had been too consumed by his own grief to notice until it was too late. "I've got some leads on work," Vaughan said, even though it was only half true. "Might have something lined up next week." Theo didn't respond. He filled a glass with water from the tap and leaned against the counter, not looking at his father. "We need to talk about your plans," Vaughan continued, keeping his voice steady. "You can't just sit in that room forever. You need to figure out what comes next." "I know what comes next." Theo's jaw tightened. "I get a dead-end job, waste my life like everyone else, and pretend it matters. That's not fair, isn't it?" Theo finally looked at him, and Vaughan saw something in his son's eyes that hurt worse than any creditor's letter: disappointment. "You worked your whole life, Dad. You built a business, did everything right. And where did it get you? Broken alone in a crappy apartment." The words hit like physical blows. Vaughan opened his mouth, then closed it. Because Theo wasn't wrong. That was the worst part. His son had watched him grind himself down to nothing, and now he was drawing the obvious conclusion. What was the point of trying? "Your mother wouldn't want you thinking like that," Vaughan said quietly. Theo's face hardened. "Don't bring her into this. She believed in you. She believed in both of us." "Yeah, well, she's not here anymore, is she?" Theo set his glass down hard enough that water sloshed onto the counter. "And maybe if you'd spent less time working and more time paying attention, things would have turned out different." The accusation hung in the air between them. Vaughan felt his chest tighten. They'd never spoken it out loud before, but he'd known Theo blamed him. For not catching the cancer earlier, for not being there enough, for not somehow saving the woman they both loved. "That's not fair," Vaughan repeated. But his voice had lost its strength. "Nothing about any of this is fair." Theo pushed off the counter and headed back toward his room. "Wait." Vaughan's voice stopped him at the doorway. "I'm going out today, to a storage auction. Hollis mentioned it might be a way to make some extra money. I could use your help loading anything I buy." Theo turned, skepticism written across his face. "A storage auction? Are you serious?" "People find valuable things sometimes. Antiques, tools, furniture, stuff we could resell. Or you could find garbage and lose what little money we have left. It's a risk," Vaughan admitted. "But right now, playing it safe isn't working out so well for us." Theo stared at him for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he shrugged. "Fine, whatever. When?" "This afternoon. 2:00. I'll be ready." Theo disappeared into his room and closed the door. Vaughan stood alone in the kitchen, listening to the coffee maker's final gurgles. Through the window, he could see the parking lot below, cracked asphalt baking in the late morning sun. This neighborhood had gone downhill over the years, but rent was cheap, and cheap was all he could afford now. He poured himself a cup of coffee and carried it to the small dining table where he'd been working on paperwork. Among the bills, he found something he'd tucked away last week, a vintage pocket watch that had belonged to his wife. He'd discovered it while cleaning out a box from the back of his closet. Wrapped in tissue paper alongside her jewelry and other keepsakes he'd been unable to part with. The watch was silver, tarnished, but still beautiful, with delicate engravings along the case. He opened it and saw the inscription inside: "Make every moment count." Her father had given it to her when she graduated college. She'd carried it with her always, a talisman against wasted time. Vaughan closed his eyes and remembered the hospital room. Her voice, barely a whisper. "Don't let him disappear, Vaughan. Don't let either of you disappear," he'd promised her. Sworn he'd take care of their son, keep them connected, make sure they both kept living instead of just existing. But promises made in hospital rooms were easier than promises kept in empty apartments. The watch ticked steadily in his palm. Make every moment count. How many moments had he wasted in the 8 years since her death? How many opportunities to reach his son had he let slip away because he was too tired, too broken, too lost in his own grief? Vaughan set the watch on the table and stared at it. Maybe Theo was right. Maybe he had wasted his life. But there had to be something left worth fighting for. There had to be some way to prove that trying still mattered. His phone buzzed. A text from Hollis. "Auction at 2 p.m., Unit 847. They say it belonged to some rich guy who disappeared. Could be interesting. Could be junk. Either way, see you there." Vaughn looked at the watch again, then at the closed door of his son's room. This was probably foolish. Gambling his last few $100s on the contents of a storage unit was exactly the kind of desperate move that usually ended badly. But sometimes, when you had nothing left to lose, desperate was all you had. He picked up the watch and slipped it into his pocket. Then he gathered up the bills, stacked them neatly, and set them aside. Today he'd take a risk. Today he'd bring his son along, and maybe, just maybe, they'd find something worth more than money, even if it was just a few hours where they weren't strangers. The storage facility sprawled across 3 acres of sun-bleached concrete on the industrial side of town. Rows of orange metal doors stretched in every direction, numbered in faded paint. Vaughn pulled into the gravel lot at 1:45, his truck coughing as he cut the engine. Theo sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed, sunglasses hiding whatever he was thinking. He hadn't said more than 5 words during the 20-minute drive. "You don't have to be happy about this," Vaughn said. "But I appreciate you coming." Theo shrugged and opened his door without responding. About 30 people had gathered near the facility office, a mix of professional auction-goers with handcarts and dollies, and curious amateurs hoping to strike gold. Vaughn spotted Hollis near the back of the crowd, a tall, lean man in his 60s with sun-weathered skin and a baseball cap pulled low. "You made it," Hollis said, gripping Vaughn's hand. He nodded at Theo. "Good to see you, son." "Hey, Hollis." Theo's tone was marginally warmer. He'd always liked Hollis, who'd worked on Vaughn's crew back in the better days. "Fair warning," Hollis said quietly. "There's some buzz about Unit 847 today. Word is it belonged to Griffith Landry." Vaughn frowned. "Should I know that name?" "Billionaire tech guy from the early 2000s. Made a fortune, then vanished about 12 years back. Nobody's seen him since. Family never claimed his estate, and apparently this storage unit was in his name. Why wouldn't his family claim it?" Theo asked, showing his first hint of interest. "That's the mystery. Some say he had no family left. Others say there was bad blood. Either way, the unit's been sitting locked for over a decade. Management finally got court approval to auction it. A woman in a company polo shirt climbed onto a small platform near the office. She held a clipboard and a megaphone. "All right, folks, let's get started. I'm Angela, facility manager. Standard rules apply. You bid, you buy, you remove everything within 48 hours. No refunds, no returns. Cash or cashier's check only." The crowd followed Angela down the main row. She stopped at several units, rolling up the doors to reveal contents: furniture, boxes, old appliances. Bidding was fast and brutal. Professional resellers dominated, snapping up units for a few $100s each. Vaughn watched and learned. These people knew what they were looking for. They could assess value in seconds, calculating resale potential before others finished processing what they were seeing. "Unit 847, Angela announced, stopping before a larger door at the end of a row. "This one's special, folks. Sealed for 12 years. Belonged to Griffith Landry, for those who remember the name. Nobody knows what's inside, and I mean nobody. The lock's never been opened since it was placed." The crowd pressed forward. Vaughn felt a flutter in his chest, anticipation mixed with dread. This was it. The unit Hollis had mentioned. "Now, I can't make promises about contents," Angela continued. "For all we know, it could be empty. But given Mr. Landry's reputation as a collector, there's potential here. Starting bid is $500. Vaughn's stomach sank. 500 was more than he'd planned to spend on any single unit. 500, called a man in the front, wearing a dealer's vest covered in auction badges. 550, countered a woman with a professional-looking camera. 600. Vaughn watched the price climb. 650, 700. His hand stayed at his side, common sense warring with something else, a feeling he couldn't quite name. Desperation, maybe. Or hope, which might be the same thing. Beside him, Theo watched intently. "You're not actually going to bid, are you?" "I don't know," Vaughn admitted. 750, someone called. Angela scanned the crowd. 750. "Do I hear 8? Silence. The professional bidders had gone quiet, calculating risk versus reward. A sealed unit was a gamble, too rich for most people's blood. Going once at 7:50, Angela said. Vaughn thought about the bills on his kitchen table, thought about his bank account, thought about his wife's watch in his pocket, the inscription inside. Make every moment count. 800, he heard himself say. Heads turned. Theo stared at him like he'd lost his mind. We have 800, Angela said, pointing at Vaughn. Do I hear 850? The crowd murmured. The professional dealer in front frowned, reassessing, but nobody raised the bid. Going once at 800. Going twice, Angela paused. Sold to the gentleman in the back for $800. Vaughn's heart hammered. He'd just spent more than his rent on a storage unit that might contain nothing but air and broken dreams. Dad, what the hell? Theo's voice was tight. I don't know, Vaughn said honestly. I just had a feeling. Hollis clapped him on the shoulder. Well, let's see if your feeling was worth $800. After Vaughn completed the paperwork and handed over cash that left his wallet painfully light, Angela led them back to Unit 847. The other auction-goers had dispersed, but a few lingered, curious to see what the mysterious Landry unit contained. You'll need bolt cutters for this lock, Angela said. It's heavy-duty, commercial grade. Hollis retrieved cutters from his truck. The lock was indeed massive, steel weathered by years but still solid. Hollis positioned the cutters and squeezed. Metal groaned. He adjusted his grip and tried again. On the third attempt, the lock gave way with a sharp crack. Moment of truth, Hollis said. Vaughn grabbed the door handle. His palms were sweating. Beside him, Theo had gone very still, anticipation overriding his earlier skepticism. Vaughn pulled. The door resisted, then slowly rolled upward with a metallic screech. Darkness yawned before them. Stale air rushed out, carrying the scent of dust and time. Angela handed Vaughn a flashlight. He clicked it on and swept the beam across the interior. The light caught shapes, large rectangular forms covered in canvas tops, stacks of boxes, the silhouettes of furniture, and in the center, illuminated in the flashlight's circle, a massive steamer trunk with brass fittings. Well, it's not empty, Hollis said. Vaughn stepped inside, his footfalls echoing. Theo followed, then Hollis. The space was roughly 10 by 20 feet, packed from floor to near ceiling with carefully arranged items. Everything was covered, protected, preserved. Someone took care of this stuff, Theo observed, running his hand along a tarp. This isn't just random junk thrown in storage. Vaughn approached the central trunk. It was beautiful, dark wood with leather straps and ornate brass corners. He tried the latch, locked. There, Theo pointed to the top of the trunk. Something rested there, barely visible in the dim light. Vaughn lifted it carefully. A book, leather-bound, with gold leaf edging on the pages. He opened the cover and read the first page, handwritten in elegant script, The Journal of Griffith Landry. If you are reading this, I am gone. What you find here is not mine anymore. It is yours. But I ask that you treat these items with care. Every object tells a story. Every story holds a life. I collect lives. Vaughn looked up at Theo. In the flashlight's glow, he saw something he hadn't seen in months. Genuine curiosity, maybe even excitement. We need to bring all of this home, Vaughn said. Tonight, before I lose my nerve. They worked for 3 hours, loading the truck with tarp-covered items and sealed boxes. The trunk was so heavy, it took all 3 of them to lift it. Whatever was inside had real weight. By the time they finished, darkness had fallen. Vaughn's back screamed and his hands were raw, but he felt more alive than he had in years. Same time tomorrow? Hollis asked. You'll need help unloading. Yeah, thanks, Hollis. On the drive home, Theo held the journal carefully in his lap, reading by the dome light. Vaughn glanced over and saw his son's face, focused, engaged, present in a way he hadn't been in months. Dad, Theo said quietly, listen to this entry. June 2008, acquired Lieutenant Pearson's flight jacket today. Shot down over Germany, 1944. Never came home. His daughter kept the jacket for 60 years, until she died. No one left to remember him. Now I will remember. What does that mean? Vaughn asked. I think Theo flipped through more pages. I think this guy collected things that belonged to people who were forgotten. Things that mattered to someone once. They pulled into the apartment parking lot. Vaughn cut the engine and sat in silence, looking at the journal in his son's hands. "We bought someone's memories," Theo said, something like wonder in his voice. "Yeah," Vaughn replied. "I think we did." The apartment looked like an antique shop had exploded. Covered shapes filled every available space. The living room, the hallway, even part of the kitchen. Vaughn and Theo had worked past midnight unloading everything. And now, in the morning light filtering through the blinds, the full scope of their acquisition was becoming clear. Vaughn stood in the center of the chaos, coffee in hand, trying to figure out where to begin. His neighbors had definitely noticed the late-night activity. Mrs. Chen from downstairs had poked her head out twice, curiosity written all over her face. He'd kept his explanations vague, estate purchase, nothing exciting. Theo emerged from his room, looking more alert than he had in weeks. He'd actually showered and changed into clean clothes. Small miracles. "I've been reading more of the journal," Theo said, holding up the leather-bound book. This Landry guy was methodical. He documented everything, where he found each item, what it cost, why it mattered. There are entries going back 30 years. "Any indication of what this stuff is worth?" Vaughn asked. "Not specifically, but some of these items." Theo flipped through pages. He mentions purchasing a painting from an estate sale for $8,000. Antique clocks worth thousands each. If even half of this is valuable, we're talking serious money. Vaughn felt that flutter again, hope mixed with disbelief. "We should start cataloging. Take photos, document everything before we think about selling anything." They began with the smaller boxes, working methodically through layers of careful packing. Landry had wrapped each item in acid-free tissue paper, labeled boxes with dates and brief descriptions. The man had been obsessive about preservation. The first box contained vintage photographs in archival sleeves, black and white images of people long dead, places that no longer existed. Each photo had a note card, names, dates, context. The Morrison family, Dust Bowl migrants, 1936, Helen Kowalski, nurse, Wee Field Hospital. He collected memories of strangers, Theo said softly, studying a photo of a young woman in a nurse's uniform. People who had no one left to remember them. The second box held letters, hundreds of them, organized by year. Love letters from soldiers who never came home. Letters from immigrants to families they'd left behind. Final letters from people who knew they were dying. "This is..." Theo paused, struggling for words. "It's beautiful and sad at the same time." Vaughn nodded. He understood the impulse. When someone died, their memories died with them, unless someone chose to preserve them. Landry had made that choice over and over, for people he'd never even known. They moved to the larger items. Pulling back tarps revealed furniture, an oak desk with intricate carvings, a Victorian settee with worn velvet upholstery, a grandfather clock that still ticked when Vaughn wound it. Each piece had a small brass plaque, attached with a date and origin. "Check this out," Theo called from across the room. He'd uncovered a tall wardrobe, and inside hung several pieces of vintage clothing. His hand hovered over a leather jacket, brown and worn, with patches on the shoulders. Vaughn came closer. The jacket was military. That much was obvious from the insignia. Theo carefully lifted it from the hanger, revealing more patches. 8th Air Force, B-17 Bomber Squadron. "There's a name," Theo said, pointing to faded stitching inside the collar. "T.R. Pearson. That's the one from the journal entry you read," Vaughn said. "The pilot who was shot down." Theo pulled out his phone and started searching. Vaughn watched his son's face as he read, saw the concentration there. This was the most engaged Theo had been with anything since dropping out of school. "Robert Pearson," Theo read aloud. "Navigator on a B-17 called Lucky Lady. Shot down over Hamburg in March 1944. Listed as MIA, presumed dead. He was 23 years old." Theo looked up. "He was barely older than me." The weight of that settled between them. Vaughn took the jacket carefully, feeling the worn leather, the weight of history. Someone's son had worn this. Someone's brother or friend. And when he died far from home, this jacket was all that came back, if it came back at all. Landry's journal says he bought it from the daughter's estate sale. Theo continued reading from his phone. She kept it her whole life. Died at 84, no children. The jacket was going to be thrown out, so Landry saved it, Vaughn said. Made sure someone would still remember. They hung the jacket carefully on the back of a chair, treating it with the reverence it deserved. Then they returned to unpacking, working in comfortable silence that would have seemed impossible just yesterday. Box after box revealed treasures, antique pocket watches, vintage jewelry, books with handwritten inscriptions, a music box that played a haunting melody, a collection of military medals, each one representing someone's courage and sacrifice. Around noon, Hollis arrived with sandwiches and more energy than men their age should possess. "Holy hell," he said, surveying the apartment. "You boys hit the jackpot." "We don't know that yet," Vaughn cautioned, but even he could feel the possibility in the air. Hollis picked up one of the pocket watches, examining it with a jeweler's eye. "This is gold. Real gold, not plated. And old, probably turn of the century. Worth at least a few thousand on its own. There are 5 more like it in that box," Theo said. Hollis whistled low. "You need to get this stuff appraised, professionally. I know a guy. Dealt with him when I had to liquidate my uncle's estate. He's honest, won't try to cheat you." "How much does an appraisal cost?" Vaughn asked. "Depends on volume. But for a collection this size, probably a few hundred. Worth every penny, if even 10% of this is valuable." Vaughn did mental math. He had maybe $400 left in his account. An appraisal would wipe him out, but Hollis was right. They needed to know what they had. "I'll call him," Vaughn decided. They spent the afternoon continuing the inventory. Theo had started a spreadsheet on his laptop, documenting each item with photos and notes from Landry's journal. It was meticulous work, but Theo approached it with unexpected enthusiasm. "Dad, look at this." Theo had opened a wooden box lined with velvet. Inside lay an antique compass, brass and beautifully preserved. "There's an engraving." Vaughn leaned in. Numbers were etched into the brass, coordinates. "That's latitude and longitude," Theo said, already typing into his phone. "These coordinates, they point to somewhere upstate, near the Catskills. Why would he engrave coordinates on a compass?" Vaughn wondered aloud. "Maybe that's where he disappeared to," Theo suggested. "The journal might have more clues." The mystery was deepening, pulling them both in. Vaughn realized they weren't just cataloging items anymore. They were piecing together the story of a man's life, trying to understand why he'd vanished and what he'd been trying to preserve. By evening, they'd made it through roughly half the collection. Hollis had left hours ago, but Vaughn and Theo kept working, neither wanting to stop. It felt good to be working together, united by common purpose. "I'm starving," Theo finally announced. "Want to order pizza?" "We probably shouldn't spend the money," Vaughn began. "Dad, we're sitting in the middle of what might be a fortune." "Let's get pizza." Vaughn laughed, actually laughed, something he couldn't remember doing in months. "Okay, pizza it is." While they waited for delivery, they sat among the artifacts eating leftover chips and drinking cheap beer Hollis had left in the fridge. The apartment was a mess, their future uncertain, but in this moment things felt almost normal. "Can I ask you something?" Theo said, not looking at his father. "Of course. Why did you really bid on that unit?" $800 was basically everything we had left. Vaughn considered lying, softening the truth. But Theo deserved honesty. "Because I was tired," Vaughn said. "Tired of playing it safe and losing anyway. Tired of watching us drift further apart. Tired of feeling like I'd already used up all my chances." He paused. "Your mom had this pocket watch. There's an inscription inside. Make every moment count. I've been carrying it around, and I realized I'd stopped counting moments. I'd stopped trying. That bid was me trying again." Theo was quiet for a long moment. "I blamed you," he finally said. "For Mom, for not catching the cancer sooner, for working too much, for, I don't know, everything." "I know. I blame myself too. Thought maybe if I'd been a better kid, she would have fought harder." Vaughn's chest tightened. "Theo, no. Your mother fought with everything she had. You were the reason she fought as long as she did. Then why did she leave?" The question came out small, wounded, the voice of the 14-year-old boy standing in that hospital doorway. "She didn't want to. She would have stayed forever if she could have." Vaughn's voice cracked. "She made me promise to take care of you. Do not let us disappear into grief." And I broke that promise. I let us both disappear. Theo wiped at his eyes. "This stuff, Landry's collection. It's all about people who were forgotten, people who disappeared. Yeah, maybe we found it because we needed to remember we're still here. The pizza arrived, breaking the emotional tension. They ate in the living room, surrounded by the possessions of strangers who trusted a billionaire recluse to remember them. And somewhere in that strange space between bites of pepperoni and passing the Parmesan, Vaughn felt something shift, the first real connection with his son in 8 years. Later that night, after Theo had gone to bed, Vaughn sat alone with Landry's journal, reading by lamplight. One entry caught his attention. "When my wife died, I wanted to disappear, to let the world forget me the way it forgets everyone eventually. But then I realized the world only forgets if we let it. Every person matters. Every story deserves to be told. I cannot bring her back, but I can make sure others are not forgotten. Perhaps in doing so, I will find a way to remember how to live." Vaughn closed the journal and looked around at the cluttered apartment. Tomorrow they'd continue the work. But tonight, for the first time in a very long time, he felt like he wasn't just existing. He was living, and so was his son. The appraiser arrived 3 days later, a compact man in his 60s named Irving Schulman, who wore wire-rimmed glasses and carried a leather case full of specialized tools. Hollis had vouched for him, and within 5 minutes of examining the collection, Vaughn understood why. "Remarkable," Irving murmured, turning a pocket watch over in his hands. He produced a jeweler's loop and studied the mechanism. "Swiss movement, 18-carat gold case, circa 1890, mint condition. This alone is worth $3,000 to $4,000. Vaughn and Theo exchanged glances. That was one watch out of dozens of items. Irving moved through the apartment with methodical precision, examining each piece, making notes on a tablet, occasionally taking photographs. He spent 20 minutes on the Victorian settee, studying the construction and upholstery. Another 15 on a collection of vintage fountain pens. "The furniture is quality, though the condition varies," Irving said. "The desk is exceptional. Hand-carved walnut, probably European, mid-1800s. Could fetch 15 to 20,000 at auction." He gestured at the grandfather clock. "That's a working Ellicott, very rare. Possibly 30,000, maybe more to the right collector." The numbers kept climbing. Vaughn felt lightheaded. The military items have strong market value, especially with proper documentation. Irving continued, examining Leyton Pearson's flight jacket. "Authenticated WPU-2 artifacts command premium prices. This jacket, with the squadron history and provenance from Landry's collection, could easily bring 10 to 15,000. "You're saying all of this together." Vaughn couldn't finish the sentence. "Conservatively, what I've seen so far, you're looking at $200,000 to $300,000. Possibly more, depending on what's in that trunk you haven't opened yet." Theo sat down hard on the settee. $300,000. "That's a conservative estimate for a quick sale," Irving clarified. "If you're patient, work with the right auction houses, you could potentially see more. But yes, Mr. Ashcroft, you've acquired a significant collection." After Irving left, his fee of $300 suddenly feeling like the best money Vaughn had ever spent, father and son sat in stunned silence. "We're not broke anymore," Theo finally said. "No," Vaughn agreed. "We're not. What do we do now?" "Good question." Vaughn looked around at the collection, thinking about Landry's journal entries, the care he'd taken with each item. "I think we need to understand what we have before we sell anything. Landry spent decades building this. We should at least know the stories." Theo nodded slowly. "The journal mentions a final piece, something he couldn't bring himself to part with. That entry about the sealed letter. They'd found the letter 2 days earlier, hidden in a false bottom of one of the smaller trunks. It was addressed simply to whoever finds this. They'd been saving it, somehow knowing it was important. "Should we open it?" Theo asked. Vaughn retrieved the envelope from where they'd carefully stored it. The paper was expensive, heavy stock, and the seal was dark red wax, impressed with initials, GL. He broke the seal and extracted several pages of handwritten text. Theo moved closer, reading over his father's shoulder. "My name is Griffith Landry. Vaughn read aloud. If you are reading this, I am gone, and my collection has found a new caretaker. I hope you will treat these items with the respect they deserve, for they represent more than monetary value. They represent lives lived, loved, and ultimately forgotten by everyone except me. The letter went on to explain Landry's philosophy, how he'd made his fortune young, married his college sweetheart, planned a life of adventure and meaning. Then his wife, Caroline, had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's at 43. He'd watched her disappear over 7 years, losing memories, losing herself, until she no longer recognized him. When Caroline died, I wanted to die with her, the letter continued. But I couldn't, so I began collecting instead, gathering the forgotten pieces of other people's lives, preserving their memories since I couldn't preserve hers. Every item in my collection represents someone who mattered, someone whose story deserved to be remembered. Theo's voice was thick when he spoke. He was trying to save everyone else because he couldn't save her. Yeah, Vaughn said quietly. The letter's final paragraph made them both pause. The final piece isn't in the storage unit. It's the one thing I couldn't bring myself to store away like the others. It's at the place where Caroline and I were happiest, the estate where we planned to grow old together. I've kept it there all these years, a museum to the life we should have had. If you found this letter, perhaps you're meant to find that too. The compass will show you the way, but I warn you, the estate holds more than memories. It holds the truth of why I disappeared, and that truth may be dangerous. Vaughn looked at Theo. The compass. The one with the coordinates. Theo was already pulling it up on his phone. The coordinates point to a property about 3 hours upstate, near a town called Fairhaven. There's an estate listed, Landry Manor. Looks like it's been abandoned for years. Dangerous how? Vaughn wondered aloud. Only one way to find out. Theo's eyes held a spark Vaughn hadn't seen in years. Excitement, purpose, maybe a hint of recklessness. We have to go there. Theo, we don't know what we're walking into. Exactly. That's what makes it interesting. Theo stood, already moving toward his room. I'll pack a bag. We can leave in the morning. Wait! But Theo was gone, door closing behind him with energy instead of the usual defeated thud. Vaughn sat alone with the letter, reading it again. There was something Landry hadn't said directly, something between the lines. The truth of why I disappeared. That truth may be dangerous. His phone rang. The screen showed his ex-wife's number. Vaughn hesitated, then answered. Vaughn. Patricia's voice was tight, controlled. I heard from Janet Feldstein that you were seen loading furniture into your truck. She said it looked expensive. Of course. Neighborhood gossip traveled faster than light. It's nothing that concerns you, Vaughn said carefully. Our divorce settlement says I'm entitled to half of any assets acquired during our marriage. This was acquired after the divorce was finalized. I'll let my lawyer determine. That. Patricia's tone sharpened. If you've come into money, Vaughn, I have a right to my share. After everything I put up with, everything I sacrificed, you left me when I needed you most, Vaughn interrupted, surprised by his own calm. You left both of us. You don't get to come back now because you smell money. Silence on the line. Then this isn't over, she hung up. Vaughn stared at the phone, feeling a familiar weight settle on his shoulders. Patricia had a way of poisoning any good thing that came his way, but not this time. This time he had something worth protecting. Theo emerged from his room with a backpack. I heard! Mom being mom? She thinks she's entitled to part of the collection. Is she? I don't know. Maybe. Vaughn ran a hand through his hair. We'll deal with it. Right now we have bigger concerns. The estate. Yeah. Vaughn looked at the compass, still sitting on the coffee table. Why do you think Landry warned us it might be dangerous? Maybe he knew something, or maybe he was just being dramatic, Theo shrugged. Either way, we're not going to find out sitting here. Vaughn wanted to argue, to be the responsible parent who protected his son from potential danger. But looking at Theo now, actually animated, engaged with something beyond his own depression, he couldn't bring himself to shut it down. We go together, Vaughn said. And if anything seems off, we leave immediately. Agreed? Agreed. They spent the evening researching the Fairhaven estate. Property records showed it had belonged to Landry, purchased in 2004. No sales recorded since. Satellite images showed a sprawling mansion surrounded by overgrown grounds, clearly abandoned. Local news articles mentioned the property occasionally. Fairhaven's Forgotten Manor, one headline read. The town had tried several times to acquire it for unpaid taxes, but some legal complication kept blocking the sale. It sat in limbo, deteriorating while lawyers argued. "Look at this," Theo said, turning his laptop around. "A forum post from 3 years ago. Tried to explore Landry Manor today. Got past the gates, but something felt wrong. Like we were being watched. My buddy swears he saw someone in one of the upper windows, but the place is supposed to be empty. We left. Could just be urban explorers scaring themselves," Vaughn suggested. "Or it could be what Landry was warning about. They loaded the truck in the morning, just essentials, plus tools in case they needed to break into the estate." The compass rode in Theo's pocket. Landry's journal sat between them on the bench seat. As they pulled out of the parking lot, Vaughn caught sight of Mrs. Chen watching from her window. Let her gossip. For the first time in years, he was doing something that mattered. Theo connected. His phone to the truck's ancient stereo, and music filled the cab. Nothing current classic rock that they both knew. Somewhere around mile 30, Theo started singing along quietly. Vaughn joined in, and for a few verses they were just a father and son on a road trip, like in the old days before cancer and grief had carved out the distance between them. The scenery changed as they drove north. Suburban sprawl giving way to hills, then forest. By the time they reached Fairhaven, the sun was climbing toward noon. The town was small, the kind of place that probably looked exactly the same as it had 50 years ago. A single main street with local shops, a diner, a post office. People moved slowly here. Nobody was in a rush. They stopped for lunch at the diner, and the waitress, name tag reading Dottie, eyed them with small-town curiosity. "Passing through?" she asked, pouring coffee. "Looking for the old Landry estate," Vaughn said. "Know where it is?" Dottie's expression shifted. "You mean the manor? That place has been locked up tight for years. Nobody goes there." "Why not?" Theo asked. "Just doesn't feel right. Owner disappeared. Left everything behind. There's something sad about it, you know, like the house is grieving." She shook her head. "You planning to go out there?" "Just curious," Vaughn said. "Well, be careful. Road's not maintained, and folks say strange things happen on that property." So, after she left, Theo leaned forward. "Strange things? That's not ominous at all. We can still turn back," Vaughn offered. Theo met his eyes. "Do you want to?" Vaughn thought about the letter, about Landry's warning, about all the careful work he'd done preserving other people's memories. The man had left them a map for a reason. "No," Vaughn said. "Let's finish what we started." The road to Landry Manor deteriorated with each passing mile. Pavement gave way to gravel, then to dirt rutted with years of erosion. Trees pressed close. On both sides, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out much of the afternoon sun. Vaughn's truck bounced and lurched over potholes deep enough to swallow a tire. "You sure this is right?" Vaughn asked, gripping the steering wheel as they navigated another rough stretch. Theo checked his phone. "GPS says we're close. Should be just ahead." The forest opened suddenly into a clearing, and there it was, Landry Manor. The mansion sprawled across manicured grounds gone wild, a 3-story testament to wealth and abandonment. Victorian architecture with modern touches. The house must have been magnificent once. Now ivy climbed the walls, windows were dark and dust-covered, and the whole place carried an air of dignified decay. A wrought-iron fence surrounded the property, 8 feet tall with spikes along the top. The main gate stood closed, secured with a heavy chain and padlock. A faded sign read, "No trespassing, private property." Vaughn parked the truck and they both climbed out. The air here felt different. Cooler, heavier somehow. The silence was profound, broken only by wind moving through trees and the distant cry of a crow. "This place is massive," Theo said, walking along the fence line. "Must be worth millions." Was worth millions, Vaughan corrected. Not sure what it's worth now. They followed the fence, looking for a way in. Around the side, they found a section where weather and neglect had weakened the connection between posts. With some effort, they managed to create an opening wide enough to squeeze through. Technically, we're trespassing, Vaughan said. Technically, we own everything Landry left behind, Theo countered. The storage unit contents, remember? Maybe that extends to this. I don't think property law works that way. Only one way to find out. They approached the house carefully, watching for signs of security or occupancy. But the place looked thoroughly abandoned. No cameras visible, no fresh tire tracks. In the overgrown driveway, no indication anyone had been here in years. The front door was solid oak, locked tight. Windows on the ground floor were barred. Vaughan circled the house, testing doors and windows, finding everything sealed. Finally, around back, he discovered a cellar entrance with a rusted padlock that broke apart when he applied pressure with a tire iron. "After you," Theo said, gesturing at the dark opening. "How generous!" Vaughan pulled out his flashlight and descended stone steps into darkness. The cellar smelled of mold and time. Their flashlight beams swept across old furniture, stacked boxes, a wine rack that still held dusty bottles. Vaughan found stairs leading up and tried the door at the top. It opened with a protest of swollen wood against the frame. They emerged into a kitchen frozen in time. Dishes still sat in the sink. A calendar on the wall showed November 2012. The last month Landry had been seen. Everything was covered in dust, but otherwise the house looked like its occupant might return at any moment. "This is surreal," Theo whispered, and Vaughan understood the impulse to keep his voice low. The house commanded a certain reverence, like walking through a museum after hours. They moved through the first floor. Dining room with a table set for two, living room with furniture arranged for conversation that would never happen, a library with thousands of books lining floor-to-ceiling shelves. Everything spoke of wealth, yes, but also of care. This had been someone's home, lovingly maintained, suddenly abandoned. Photographs covered every surface, Landry and a woman who must have been Caroline, chronicling a relationship from young and radiant to middle-aged and comfortable. Then the photos changed. Caroline's eyes grew distant, confused. The later pictures showed only Landry, always alone, his expression haunted. "Look at this," Theo said from across the library. He'd found a desk covered in papers, journals, and legal documents. More of his writing. Vaughan joined him. The journals here were different from the one in the storage unit. More personal, less about the collection, and more about Landry's inner life. Vaughan opened one at random and read, June 15th, 2010. Caroline has been gone 3 years now, but I still set 2 places at the table. I still find myself turning to share a thought with her, only to remember she's not there. The collection grows, 43 new items this month, but nothing fills the emptiness. Perhaps nothing ever will. He was so lonely, Theo said quietly. They continued exploring. The second floor held bedrooms, each one perfectly preserved. The master suite was clearly where Landry had spent most of his time. The bed unmade, books stacked on nightstands, reading glasses on a dresser, a photograph of Caroline sat beside the bed, young and smiling, frozen in happier days. In the closet, they found Caroline's clothes still hanging undisturbed. Landry hadn't been able to let go. He'd preserved everything, turning the house into a shrine to the life they'd shared. "Dad," Theo called from down the hall, "I found something." Vaughan followed his son's voice to what looked like a study. But as Theo showed him, the room held a secret. He'd been examining the built-in bookshelf when he'd leaned against a section and heard a click. Part of the shelf had swung inward on hidden hinges. Behind the false wall was a narrow door, unlocked. "Well," Vaughan said, "I guess we're going in." The hidden room was small, perhaps 10 feet square, but what it lacked in size, it made up for in emotional impact. The walls were covered, floor to ceiling, with photographs of Landry and Caroline. Their wedding, Vacations, quiet moments at home, a visual chronicle of love spanning decades. In the center of the room sat a small table, and on that table rested an ornate music box, silver with gold inlay, beautiful enough to take Vaughan's breath away. Theo reached for it, then hesitated. "Should I?" "We came all this way," Vaughan said. Theo carefully lifted the music box. It was heavier than it looked, solid and precisely crafted. He found the winding key underneath and turned it gently. The mechanism inside clicked and whirred, then began to play. The melody was achingly beautiful, haunting and melancholic. Vaughan didn't recognize the tune, but it carried such emotion that he felt his throat tighten. Theo opened the lid. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a wedding ring, white gold or platinum, with a single diamond. Beside it lay a small photograph of Caroline on her wedding day, radiant in white, her whole life ahead of her. Vaughan picked up the ring carefully. Inside the band was an inscription, "Forever isn't long enough." This is what he couldn't let go of, Theo said. The final piece of his collection, her ring. They stood in silence, the music box playing its lonely song. Vaughan thought about loss, about love that endured past death, about the desperate human need to hold on to what we can't keep. "There's something else," Theo said, reaching into the music box. He'd noticed a false bottom, subtle but visible once you knew to look. He pressed on it, and it lifted free. Beneath was a USB drive and several folded papers. Vaughan unfolded the papers while Theo examined the drive. Legal documents, dense text filled with corporate language and financial terms. But certain words jumped out: fraud, misrepresentation, criminal conspiracy. "What is this?" Theo asked. "I think—" Vaughan's pulse quickened as he read. "I think these are whistleblower documents. Evidence of financial crimes. From when?" 2008, right before the financial crisis." Theo's eyes widened. Landry was trying to expose someone. Vaughan kept reading, his stomach sinking with each paragraph. The documents detailed systematic fraud at a major investment firm, falsified records, hidden losses, investors defrauded of billions. And at the center of it all was a name that appeared again and again: Preston Vance, Chief Investment Officer. "This is why he disappeared," Vaughan said. "He had evidence that could destroy powerful people. But why hide it here? Why not go to the authorities?" Maybe he tried. Or maybe he was scared. Vaughan looked around the room, understanding now why Landry had warned them. "This isn't just treasure we found, Theo. It's dangerous information." As if in response to his words, a sound echoed through the house below them. The distinct creak of a door opening. They froze. Theo killed his flashlight. Vaughan did the same. Footsteps on the floor below. Slow, deliberate searching. "Someone's in the house," Theo whispered. Vaughan's mind raced. They were on the second floor, in a hidden room. The intruder, or intruders, didn't know they were here yet. But they were trapped. More footsteps, moving through rooms. Vaughan heard voices, low and professional. At least 2 people, maybe more. "We need to get out," Vaughan whispered. He grabbed the USB drive and documents, stuffing them inside his jacket. Theo carefully closed the music box and tucked it under his arm. They crept to the hidden door and peered out into the study. Empty for now. The voices were coming from downstairs, but moving closer. "The back stairs," Theo mouthed, pointing down the hall. They moved as quietly as possible, every floorboard creak sounding like a gunshot in Vaughan's ears. The voices below grew louder, men discussing search patterns, mentioning rooms to check. These weren't random trespassers. They were looking for something, or someone. Vaughan and Theo reached the back stairs and descended, listening for movement. The voices had moved to the front of the house. They had a window, but it was closing fast. They reached the kitchen. The cellar door was 20 feet away. Vaughan gestured, "Go quickly but quietly." They crossed the kitchen, reached the door, started down the cellar stairs. "Check the kitchen," a voice said behind them. They ran. Down the stone steps, through the cellar, dirt floor muffling their footsteps. Behind them a shout, "They're here! Go, go!" Out through the cellar entrance into twilight. The sun had set while they were inside. Vaughan's truck was visible across the grounds. They sprinted for it. Theo clutching the music box, Vaughn with one hand inside his jacket protecting the documents. Behind them, men emerged from the house. Vaughn heard shouts, saw flashlight beams sweeping the grounds. They reached the truck. Vaughn's hands shook as he fumbled with keys. The engine turned over, thank God, and he threw it in reverse, spinning away from the fence. In the rear-view mirror, he saw two figures at the fence line, watching them leave. One of them raised what looked like a phone, taking a picture of the truck's license plate. "Go, go, go," Theo urged unnecessarily. Vaughn did. The truck bounced down the rutted road faster than was safe, branches scraping the sides. His heart hammered. Theo clutched the music box and the door handle, his face pale in the dashboard lights. They didn't speak until they reached the paved road, didn't breathe easily until they were back in Fairhaven, mixing with what little traffic the small town had. "What just happened?" Theo finally asked. "I don't know," Vaughn said. "But Landry was right. This is dangerous." His phone buzzed. "Unknown number." Vaughn's blood ran cold. He answered on speaker. "Mr. Ashcroft." The voice was calm, cultured, utterly without emotion. "You have something that doesn't belong to you. I suggest you return it." The line went dead. They drove in silence for 20 minutes, constantly checking mirrors for signs of pursuit. Vaughn's hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel, his mind racing through implications and possibilities, none of them good. "We should call the police," Theo said. "And tell them what?" "That we broke into an abandoned property and found evidence of crimes committed 17 years ago. That someone called us but didn't actually threaten us. They were in that house, Dad, waiting for us." "I know," Vaughn's jaw tightened. "Which means someone knew we'd be there. Someone's been watching us since we opened that storage unit." Theo pulled out his phone and started searching. "Preston Vance. Let's see who we're dealing with." The results came quickly. Preston Vance, 62, CEO of Vance Capital Management, a major investment firm managing over $50 billion in assets. Graduate of Yale, former Wall Street prodigy, now a billionaire philanthropist who donated generously to politicians and cultural institutions. His face appeared in dozens of photos, gala events, charity functions, corporate announcements. Distinguished silver hair, expensive suits, the confident smile of someone who'd never heard the word no mean anything. "This is the guy Landry had evidence against," Theo read from an article. "In 2008, there were rumors of impropriety at his firm, but nothing was ever proven. The financial crisis buried the story. Vance survived and thrived while others went to prison, because Landry disappeared before he could testify," Vaughn said. Or worse, the word hung between them, worse, as in murdered, as in they were now holding evidence that could implicate a billionaire in fraud and possibly homicide. "We're in over our heads," Theo said quietly. "Yeah, we are." They stopped at a gas station outside a larger town, needing distance from Fairhaven and time to think. While Vaughn filled the tank, Theo went inside for coffee and snacks. When he returned, his face was troubled. There was a guy in there. Black SUV at the pump behind us. He was watching us. "I'm sure of it." Vaughn's stomach dropped. He glanced over and saw the vehicle, dark, expensive, windows tinted. Could be nothing. Could be everything. "We're not going straight home," Vaughn decided. "Not until we figure this out." "Where then?" "Hollis. We can trust him, and his place is remote enough that we'll see anyone coming." They merged back onto the highway, taking a deliberately indirect route. The black SUV didn't follow, or at least it didn't follow obviously. But Vaughn couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, tracked, hunted. His phone rang again. This time he recognized the number, Patricia, his ex-wife. He almost didn't answer, then thought better of it. "Normal routines, normal contacts. Don't act guilty." "What is it, Patricia?" "Don't take that tone with me." Her voice was sharp. "My lawyer says you're required to disclose any significant assets acquired within 6 months of our divorce finalization. The divorce was final 9 months ago. He thinks we can argue the time frame. The point is, Vaughn, I know you found something valuable. Janet saw you loading expensive furniture. Janet should mind her own business. I'm entitled to what's mine. We were married for 23 years. I gave up my career for you, for our family. You left when things got hard, Vaughn interrupted, surprising himself with his calm. You left me alone with our grieving son. You don't get to come back now because you heard I might have money. This isn't over. My lawyer will be in touch. She hung up. Vaughn tossed the phone onto the dashboard, frustration boiling over. She's not going to let this go, Theo said. I know, but right now she's the least of our problems. They reached Hollis's property after dark, 20 acres of woods with a small house set back from the road. Hollis had retired here after selling his share of the construction business, living simply off savings and the occasional carpentry job. His truck was in the driveway, lights on in the windows. He met them at the door, taking in their expressions. What happened? Inside, over coffee, they told him everything, the estate, the hidden room, the documents, the men in the house, the phone call. Hollis listened without interrupting, his weathered face growing more serious with each revelation. Let me see the documents, he said finally. Vaughn spread them on the kitchen table. Hollis put on reading glasses and studied each page carefully. He'd been in business long enough to understand financial documents, and what he saw clearly disturbed him. This is evidence of systematic fraud, Hollis said. Vance's firm was hiding massive losses, falsifying reports to investors. When the market crashed in 2008, they should have gone under. But they survived because they'd already moved the bad assets off their books, stuck other people with the losses. How much are we talking about? Theo asked. Billions. This kind of fraud. People lost their life savings, their retirement funds. Pension funds were wiped out. Hollis removed his glasses. If this evidence had come out at the time, Vance would have gone to prison. His firm would have been dismantled. But Landry disappeared first, Vaughn said. The question is, did he disappear on his own, or was he helped? The implications settled over them. If Vance had been willing to commit fraud on that scale, had stolen billions, what would he do to protect that secret? How far would he go? You need to give this to the authorities, Hollis said. Tonight. And tell them what? Vaughn spread his hands. We broke into a private estate and stole documents. We have no chain of custody, no way to prove these are authentic. A lawyer like Vance can afford will shred us. Then what's your plan? Hide from a billionaire who clearly has resources to find you? Vaughn didn't have an answer. He looked at Theo, who was turning the music box over in his hands, studying the craftsmanship. There might be more on the USB drive, Theo said. Emails, financial records, something that could prove authenticity. We need a computer that can't be traced, Hollis said. Use yours and they might be able to track it. Library? Theo suggested. Public computers, VPN connection? Tomorrow, Vaughn decided. Tonight we stay here, lay low. Tomorrow we see what's on that drive and figure out our next move. Hollis showed them to the spare room. One bed, a couch, enough space for both of them. After he left, Vaughn and Theo sat in the quiet, processing the day's events. I'm sorry I got you into this, Vaughn said. You didn't. We got into it together. Theo managed a weak smile. Besides, this is the most alive I've felt since Mom died. Terrified, but alive. That's not exactly comforting. No, but it's true. Theo set the music box on the nightstand. Do you think Landry knew this would happen? That whoever found his storage unit would end up here? I think he hoped someone would finish what he started. Expose the truth. Get justice for all those people Vance defrauded. That's a lot of faith to put in strangers. Maybe, or maybe he was desperate. Maybe he knew he was running out of time, and this was his only play. Hide the evidence where no one would think to look, then hope the right people found it. Theo was quiet for a moment. What if we're not the right people? What if we can't pull this off? Vaughn thought about Lieutenant Pearson's flight jacket, about all the forgotten lives Landry had preserved, about Caroline's ring and the inscription. Forever isn't long enough. He thought about his own wife, her final words, asking him to take care of their son. Then we try anyway, Vaughn said. Because some things are worth the risk. That night Vaughn barely slept. Every sound outside, wind in the trees, an animal moving through brush, sounded like approaching danger. He kept checking his phone, expecting another call, another threat. But the night passed quietly. In the morning, they found Hollis already awake, making breakfast. Eggs, bacon, toast, simple food that tasted better than it had any right to. "I've been thinking," Hollis said. "You need someone on your side who understands how this game is played. Someone who's taken on powerful people before and lived to tell about it. You know someone like that?" Vaughn asked. "Maybe. There's a journalist named Leopold Crane. Used to work for the Times, did investigative reporting on corporate fraud. He exposed a pharmaceutical company scandal about 10 years back, almost got killed for it. He's retired now, but he might help us," Theo finished. "Or tell us we're insane and to run far and fast." Hollis poured more coffee. "Worth a try, though. I'll see if I can track down his contact information." After breakfast, they drove to the county library, a Carnegie building that had served the community for over a century. Inside, they found a public computer station in a quiet corner. Theo handled the technical aspects, setting up a VPN, creating anonymous accounts, ensuring their activity couldn't be easily traced. Then he plugged in the USB drive. The drive was encrypted. Of course it was.
"Can you break it?"
Vaughn asked. "Maybe, if the password is something guessable, related to Landry's life." Theo tried several combinations: Caroline's name, their wedding date, the address of the estate. Nothing worked. "Try the inscription," Vaughn suggested. From the ring, Theo typed, "Forever isn't long enough." The encryption unlocked. Inside were hundreds of files: emails, financial spreadsheets, scanned documents, audio recordings. Years of evidence, meticulously organized. Landry had built an airtight case against Vance and his associates, documenting every fraudulent transaction, every falsified report, every lie told to investors. "This is it," Theo breathed. "This is everything we need." They copied the files to a cloud account, then to 2 separate flash drives for backup. As they worked, Vaughn's phone buzzed. Another unknown number. He stepped away from the computer to answer.
"Hello?"
"Mr. Ashcroft," the same calm voice from before. "I know you're at the county library. I know you've accessed the files. I'm prepared to make you an offer, $10 million for everything you found. The documents, the drive, the music box, everything. Cash, untraceable, delivered wherever you'd like. You and your son disappear, start over somewhere warm. Think of it as early retirement." Vaughn's blood ran cold. They were being watched right now. He'd looked around the library. Elderly woman reading newspapers, young mother with 2 children, college-aged student with headphones on. Any of them could be surveillance.
"And if I refuse?"
Vaughn asked. "Then I'll be forced to take more aggressive measures. You have 24 hours to decide." "I'll call tomorrow, same time." "Think carefully, Mr. Ashcroft. Think about your son." The line went dead. Vaughn returned to Theo, his face pale. "We need to leave, now." They drove back to Hollis's house in tense silence, constantly checking mirrors, taking random turns to ensure they weren't being followed. Vaughn's mind churned through scenarios, none of them good. $10 million, a fortune beyond anything he'd imagined. And all they had to do was walk away. Let Vance keep his secrets, let the victims of his fraud remain victims. "You're thinking about taking it," Theo said. It wasn't a question. "I'm thinking about keeping you alive. That's not the same thing as thinking it's right." Vaughn gripped the steering wheel harder. "Right doesn't matter if we're dead." Back at Hollis's place, they spread everything out on the kitchen table. The documents, printouts from the USB drive, the music box, with Caroline's ring still nestled inside. Hollis had managed to track down Leopold Crane's email address and had sent a carefully worded message explaining their situation. "How long until we hear back?" Vaughn asked. "Could be hours, could be days." Crane's cautious. "He'll want to verify we're legitimate before making contact. We don't have days." Vance gave us 24 hours. Hollis poured whiskey into 3 glasses, sliding them across the table. "Then let's figure out what we know and what we're going to do about it." They worked through the files methodically. The scope of Vance's fraud was staggering. Not just billions stolen, but lives destroyed. Pension funds wiped out, leaving retirees destitute. College funds vanished, dreams of education evaporating. Families who'd trusted Vance Capital Management with their savings left with nothing. One file particularly caught Theo's attention, a ledger showing transactions, dates, and amounts. But more than that, it showed names, not just Vance, but 6 other executives who'd participated in the fraud. Men who'd walked away wealthy while the company's clients suffered. These people are all still in positions of power, Theo said, cross-referencing names against current corporate directories. Vance is CEO of his own firm now. 2 of his co-conspirators are at other major investment banks. One's a hedge fund manager. They got away with it and kept climbing. Because Landry disappeared before he could testify, Hollis said. Without his evidence, prosecutors had nothing that would stick. Vaughn stared at a photograph printed from one of the files, Vance at a charity gala. Smiling, champagne glass raised, celebrating wealth built on stolen money. The casual arrogance in that smile made his blood boil. There's something else, Theo said, scrolling through more files on his laptop. Look at this. Email exchanges between Landry and someone named Advocate. They were working together, planning to expose Vance. The emails told a troubling story. Landry had tried going through official channels, the SEC, federal prosecutors, even the FBI. But Vance had connections, money, lawyers who could bury investigations in paperwork and technicalities. Every attempt to expose the fraud had been blocked. Then Landry had connected with Advocate, someone who promised a different approach. The emails discussed strategy, timing, the need for irrefutable evidence that couldn't be dismissed or delayed. The final email from Advocate was dated October 15th, 2012, 2 weeks before Landry disappeared. We need to move quickly. They know you're coming forward. Get somewhere safe. Protect the evidence. When the time is right, we'll release everything simultaneously. Press, prosecutors, regulators. They won't be able to contain it all at once, trust me. I'll be in touch within the week. But there were no more emails after that. Landry had vanished and Advocate had gone silent. Who is Advocate? Theo wondered aloud. Maybe Crane knows, Hollis suggested. This level of coordination, someone in the investigative journalism world. Vaughn's laptop chimed. Email notification. From an encrypted address with no identifying information. I received your message via Hollis. If you truly have Griffith Landry's evidence, we need to talk. But not electronically. Public place tomorrow noon. Grant Park, South Fountain. Come alone, both of you, no one else. I'll find you. It was signed simply LC. That was fast, Theo said. Too fast. Vaughn looked at Hollis. Could this be a trap? Crane's paranoid, but he's not reckless. Public place in daylight. He's being careful too. Vaughn checked the time. They had 18 hours until the meeting with Crane, and 6 hours after that, before Vance's deadline. The pieces were moving quickly now, converging towards some inevitable confrontation. His phone rang. Vaughn didn't recognize the number but answered anyway. If Vance was calling early, he wanted to hear it. Mr. Ashcroft, a woman's voice this time professional and cold. I represent Preston Vance. My client is prepared to increase his offer to $15 million for the immediate return of all materials taken from the Fairhaven estate. This is his final offer. $15 million, Vaughn repeated, letting the others hear. Correct. Wire transfer to any account you specify or cash delivery. In exchange, you sign a non-disclosure agreement and turn over everything, documents, files, all copies. My client wants this matter resolved quietly and quickly. And if I want to think about it? The offer expires with this phone call. Yes or no, Mr. Ashcroft? Vaughn looked at Theo, at Hollis, at the evidence spread across the table. He thought about his empty bank account, the eviction notice, years of struggle and defeat. $15 million was generational wealth. It was security, opportunity, freedom from the constant anxiety of poverty. It was also blood money. Tell your client no, Vaughn said. Silence on the line. Then that's a mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. The woman hung up. Vaughn set the phone down with shaking hands. Are you insane? Theo's voice was strained. That was $15 million. I know. We could have been set for life, both of us. We could have let Vance get away with destroying thousands of lives, Vaughn interrupted. We could have taken his money and known we were bought. Could you have lived with that? Theo opened his mouth, closed it. He looked away, jaw working. Finally, "No, I couldn't have. Neither could I." Hollis raised his whiskey glass. "To being noble idiots, they drank. The liquor burned, but not as much as knowing they'd just painted targets on their backs. We need insurance," Hollis said. "Something that ensures Vance can't just make you disappear like he did Landry." "Like what?" Vaughn asked. "Dead man's switch. You set up the evidence to release automatically if anything happens to you. That way, hurting you only guarantees the information goes public. Can we do that?" Theo asked. "With the right setup, yeah. Schedule the files to send to multiple news organizations, regulatory agencies, prosecutors. Unless you cancel the timer, everything releases automatically." They spent the next several hours implementing Hollis's plan. Theo handled the technical aspects, creating multiple redundant systems, setting up encrypted emails, scheduled to send in 48 hours unless manually cancelled. The recipients list was comprehensive. Major newspapers, television networks, the SEC, FBI, state attorneys general. "If anything happens to us," Theo explained, "the evidence goes everywhere simultaneously. Vance won't be able to contain it. Assuming he doesn't find a way to stop the transmission," Vaughn said. "That's why there are multiple redundancies. He'd have to shut down the entire internet to stop this. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. A layer of protection that might keep them alive long enough to see this through." Around midnight, exhausted but too wired to sleep, Vaughn found himself alone in the kitchen. He'd sent Theo to bed. The kid needed rest. Hollis had retired an hour earlier, but Vaughn sat at the table, staring at Carolyn's ring in the music box. Forever isn't long enough. Landry had loved his wife so completely that losing her had broken something fundamental inside him. The collection, the evidence, the disappearance. It was all connected to that loss, that grief, that desperate need to make something matter. Vaughn understood that now. He'd been broken too since losing his wife. He'd let grief consume him, distance him from his son, reduce his life to mere survival. But this, fighting for something bigger than himself, standing up to power even when it was dangerous, this felt like living again. His phone buzzed. Text message from unknown number, "Last chance. Take the money. Protect your son." Vaughn looked at the message for a long moment. Then he deleted it and turned off his phone. In the spare room, he found Theo still awake, staring at the ceiling. "Can't sleep either?" Vaughn asked. "Keep thinking about all those people Vance hurt. The ones who lost everything." Theo rolled onto his side to face his father. "Mom's life insurance barely covered her medical bills. We lost the house, the business, everything, and that was just bad luck, just life being cruel. But what Vance did, he chose to steal from people. He looked at their trust and decided it was worth less than his wealth. Yeah, I want him to pay for that. I want everyone to know what he did. Me too, son. Me too." They lay in the darkness, father and son, bound together by purpose for the first time in years. Outside, wind moved through trees. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The world kept turning, indifferent to their small human drama. But in the morning, they would meet Leopold Crane. In the morning, they would take the next step toward justice or destruction. And at this point, Vaughn wasn't sure there was much difference between the two. Grant Park stretched across acres of urban green space, busy even at noon on a weekday. Joggers circled the paths, office workers ate lunch on benches, tourists photographed fountains and skyline views. The crowd was both comfort and concern. Plenty of witnesses, but also plenty of places to hide surveillance. Vaughn and Theo arrived 15 minutes early, positioning themselves near the south fountain, where they could watch approaches from all directions. Vaughn carried a messenger bag containing copies of the most damning documents. The originals remained with Hollis, who'd promised to release everything if they didn't check in by 3 o'clock. "There," Theo said quietly, nodding toward an older man approaching from the east path. Leopold Crane looked exactly like someone who'd spent decades investigating dangerous people, weathered, alert, moving with the careful awareness of someone who'd survived attempts on his life. He was perhaps 70, lean and grey, wearing a jacket despite the warmth, probably concealing a recording device or weapon or both. He sat on the bench beside them without introduction, eyes scanning the park constantly. "You have the evidence?" His voice was rough, decades of cigarettes leaving their mark. "Some of it. The rest is secure." Vaughn passed him a manila folder containing selected documents and printouts. Crane reviewed them with practiced speed, his expression darkening with each page. When he finished, he looked at Vaughn with something approaching respect. "Griffith Landry. After all these years," he shook his head. "I knew him, you know. Before he disappeared. We were working together." "Advocate," Theo said. "That was you." "Yes, Landry came to me after official channels failed. We spent months building the case, gathering evidence, preparing for the biggest financial fraud exposure since Enron." Crane's jaw tightened. Then he vanished. "I thought Vance had him killed." "Probably did, though they never found a body. The evidence was hidden at his estate," Vaughn explained. "Along with this." He showed Crane a photo of Caroline's ring. Everything he loved, everything he was protecting. He was a good man caught in an impossible situation. Vance has connections everywhere. Politicians, judges, law enforcement. Every time we thought we had a path forward, it got blocked. Crane handed back the folder. "You should know what you're up against. Vance won't just threaten you. He'll destroy your reputation, fabricate criminal charges, make you look like the criminals. And if that doesn't work, he'll make us disappear like Landry," Vaughn finished. "Exactly. That's why we need your help," Theo said. "You know how to fight people like this. You've done it before." Crane studied them both, a broke carpenter and his dropout son, holding evidence that could topple a billionaire. Against all odds, they'd found Landry's final gift and had been brave enough or foolish enough to try using it. "I've been waiting 12 years for this," Crane said finally. "I made Landry a promise, that his evidence wouldn't die with him, that Vance would face justice eventually. If you're serious about this, I can help. But you need to understand the cost. Your lives will never be normal again. Vance will come after you with everything he has." "He already is," Vaughn said. "And then we move fast and we move smart." Crane pulled out a burner phone. "I've been working with a federal prosecutor, someone Vance hasn't bought. She's been building a case for years, waiting for the evidence she needs. This could be it. Why should we trust her?" Theo asked. "How do we know she's not compromised?" "Because she's the one who reopened the investigation after I showed her what I had on Vance. She's risked her career pursuing this." Crane dialed a number. "Her name is Ann Weatherby, Assistant U.S. Attorney, Southern District. She'll want to verify the evidence immediately." The call connected. Crane spoke briefly, then handed the phone to Vaughn. "Mr. Ashcroft." The woman's voice was crisp, professional, energized. "Mr. Crane tells me you have materials related to the Landry investigation. I need to see them today. Can you come to my office?" "Is it safe?" Vaughn asked. "I'll have federal marshals present. Vance may have resources, but he doesn't own the U.S. Attorney's office. Not yet, anyway." They arranged a meeting for 4 o'clock. Crane would accompany them, bringing his own files to corroborate Landry's evidence. Everything was moving quickly now, momentum building toward inevitable collision. After disconnecting, Crane stood. "One more thing. Vance knows you're in the city. He'll have people watching. Stay in public places, stay together, and trust no one except me and Weatherby." "Understood," they nodded. "See you at 4. Crane melted into the crowd, disappearing with the ease of long practice. Vaughn and Theo sat on the bench, watching the fountain, neither speaking. Around them, the park continued its normal rhythm. Children playing, couples walking, life proceeding as if the world wasn't about to shift. "We're really doing this," Theo said. "Last chance to walk away. We could still take Vance's money, disappear somewhere warm like he suggested." "You don't mean that." "No. But I wanted to give you the option." Theo shook his head. "I'm seeing this through. For Landry. For all the people Vance hurt. For Mom, who taught us that doing the right thing matters, even when it's hard." Vaughn felt his throat tighten. "She'd be proud of you. She'd be proud of both of us." They left the park and spent the next hours moving through the city. Coffee shops, bookstores, museums, never staying anywhere long enough to become targets. Vaughan's phone stayed off, powered down, and battery removed. They communicated with Hollis via Theo's phone, using a code they'd agreed on. At 3:30, they met Crane outside the Federal Building, a fortress of stone and security downtown. Marshals met them at the entrance, escorted them through metal detectors and multiple security checkpoints. This wasn't the kind of place Vance could reach easily, and Weatherby's office was small but organized, walls covered with case files and legal references. She was perhaps 50, sharp-eyed, radiating controlled intensity. 2 federal agents flanked her desk, witnesses, Vaughn realized, ensuring proper chain of custody for evidence. "Show me," she said without preamble. They laid it out, documents, USB drive, printouts, photographs. Weatherby and her team examined everything with forensic attention. An hour passed, then another. They verified dates, cross-referenced transactions, confirmed authenticity through various technical means Vaughn didn't fully understand. Finally, Weatherby looked up. "This is it. This is what we've needed for over a decade. Can you prosecute?" Crane asked. "We can indict. Grand jury will convene within the week. With this evidence, we can bring charges against Vance and his co-conspirators. Fraud, racketeering, conspiracy. We're talking decades in federal prison. What about witness protection?" Vaughn asked. "For my son and me. I can arrange it. You'll testify before the grand jury, then we'll relocate you until trial. New identities if necessary." Theo looked stricken. "We'd have to disappear? New names, new lives? Only until Vance is in custody," Weatherby assured him. "Once he's arrested and detained pending trial, the immediate threat diminishes." "How long?" Vaughn pressed. "Could be weeks. Could be months. These cases are complex." Vaughn looked at his son, saw the fear and determination warring in his expression. They'd come so far, risked so much, but the cost was becoming clear. They'd have to abandon their lives, such as they were, for however long it took to bring Vance down. "We'll do it," Vaughn decided. The process began immediately. Weatherby made calls, set wheels in motion that couldn't be stopped. Within an hour, U.S. Marshals were arranging safe-house accommodations. A stenographer was brought in to take formal statements. Everything Vaughn and Theo said would become part of the official record, ammunition for the prosecution. "We need to move quickly," Weatherby explained. "Once word leaks that we're pursuing this, and it will leak, Vance will try to flee or destroy additional evidence. We're seeking arrest warrants tonight, moving on him tomorrow morning." "That fast?" Vaughn asked. "The grand jury was already convened for other matters. We can present this evidence by end of day. If they vote to indict, which they will, federal agents will execute arrests at dawn." She paused. "You two need to be invisible until then. One safe house tonight, another location after the arrests. No contact with anyone outside this office until we say otherwise." Theo's face paled. "We can't even tell Hollis." "One of my agents will inform him that you're safe. But no direct contact. Vance has proven he can monitor communications. We can't risk it." They spent 2 more hours giving statements, recounting everything from the storage auction to the estate to the threats. The stenographer's fingers flew across keys, recording it all. Crane provided his own testimony, adding 12 years of investigation to the record. By the time they finished, darkness had fallen outside. Marshals escorted them through underground parking to an unmarked sedan. No one told them where they were going. Standard security protocol. The safe house was a modest apartment in a neighborhood Vaughn didn't recognize. 2 marshals would maintain watch outside, rotating in 6-hour shifts. Inside, the space was impersonal. Generic furniture, no personal effects, everything designed for temporary occupation. "Food in the fridge, basics in the cabinets," one marshal explained. "Don't go near windows. Don't make phone calls. Someone will brief you in the morning after the arrests." Then they were alone. Theo collapsed onto the couch, running hands through his hair. "This is insane. Yesterday we were cataloging antiques. Now we're in witness protection." "I know." Vaughn sat beside him. "I'm sorry. I never imagined—" "Don't apologize," Theo cut him off. "This is the right thing. It's a lot." They ate microwaved food that tasted like cardboard, neither having much appetite. The television stayed off, too risky according to the marshals. So they sat in near silence, listening to city sounds filtered through walls, waiting for morning. Around midnight, unable to sleep, Vaughn found Theo at the kitchen table, sketching on a notepad the marshals had provided. "What's that?" Vaughn asked. "Floor plan of the estate." Theo showed his work, detailed drawings of the rooms they'd explored, the hidden study, the placement of Caroline's shrine. "I keep thinking about Landry. How lonely he must have been, building that collection, preserving all those memories, but having no one to share them with. He had Caroline, in his heart at least. Is that enough? Memories of someone gone?" Vaughn understood the question beneath the question. "Your mother isn't just a memory to me. She's in every decision I make, every time I try to be better than I was. She's in you, your kindness, your sense of justice, your stubborn streak." Theo smiled faintly. "Pretty sure the stubborn streak comes from you. Possibly. But the point is, people we love don't leave us when they die. They become part of who we are. Landry knew that. That's why he spent his life preserving stories. Because stories keep people alive. What's our story going to be?" Theo asked quietly. "The broke carpenter and his son who took on a billionaire? Maybe. Or maybe it's the story of a father and son who found each other again when they'd almost given up. The treasure was just the excuse." Theo nodded slowly. "I like that version better. They talked into the early hours, about memories of better times, about dreams deferred, about what might come after all this was over. If Vance went to prison, if they survived this intact, what would they do with the freedom that came after?" "We still have Landry's collection," Theo said. "The legitimate antiques and historical items. Irving said they were worth a few $100,000. What do you think we should do with it?" "Keep some. The flight jacket, maybe. Some of the photographs and letters. Donate the rest to museums, historical societies, places that will preserve the stories properly." Theo paused. "And I was thinking maybe we start something. A business, but not just for profit. Something that helps people preserve their family histories, their memories. Make sure stories don't get lost. Like Landry did, but accessible to everyone." "Exactly." Vaughn felt warmth spread through his chest. "Your mother would love that idea. Think we could make it work?" "I think we could try." Dawn came slowly, grey light filtering through covered windows. Vaughn had dozed fitfully, startling awake at every small sound. Beside him on the couch, Theo slept more soundly, exhaustion finally overcoming anxiety. At 6:30, a knock at the door, the signal they'd been told to expect. Vaughn answered to find a different marshal, this one holding a tablet. "It's done," she said simply. "Federal agents executed arrest warrants 30 minutes ago. Preston Vance is in custody, along with 4 of his co-conspirators. 2 others are being located now." Relief flooded through Vaughn so powerfully his knees nearly buckled. "It's over. This part is, there's still trial, still testimony you'll need to provide. But the immediate threat is neutralized. Vance is being held without bail pending arraignment." Theo appeared at Vaughn's shoulder, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "They arrested him?" "This morning. It's all over the news." She turned the tablet to show them. Every major outlet was running the story. Billionaire investment manager arrested in massive fraud case. Vance's face filled screens, looking stunned and furious as agents led him from his penthouse in handcuffs. "We did it," Theo whispered. "We actually did it." The marshal smiled, the first real warmth Vaughn had seen from any of the security personnel. "You did more than that. This case is going to recover billions for victims, expose corruption at the highest levels. You two are heroes, even if most people will never know your names." Vaughn looked at his son, saw tears streaming down Theo's face, relief, triumph, exhaustion, all mixed together. He pulled Theo into an embrace, holding tight. "We did it together," Vaughn said. The media firestorm exceeded anything Vaughn could have imagined. By midday, every news network was running continuous coverage. Financial analysts dissected Vance's fraud. Victims came forward by the hundreds, sharing stories of devastation. The scope of the crime became clearer with each revelation. Not just billions stolen, but entire communities destroyed, generations of wealth erased. Anne Weatherby held a press conference at 2 o'clock. Vaughan and Theo watched from the safe house as she outlined the charges. 37 counts of fraud, conspiracy, racketeering, obstruction of justice. The evidence was overwhelming. Landry's files, combined with 12 years of additional investigation by Crane and federal prosecutors, painted an irrefutable picture of systematic criminality. "Justice delayed is not justice denied," Weatherby said into the cameras. "Today we take the first step toward holding these defendants accountable for the immeasurable harm they've caused." Reporters shouted questions about how the evidence was obtained, who had provided it. Weatherby deflected smoothly, protecting Vaughan and Theo's identities. For now, at least, they remained anonymous. "You'll need to testify eventually," the marshal on duty reminded them. "Grand jury first, then trial if it goes that far. Your names will come out." "How long until trial?" Vaughan asked. "Could be a year, maybe longer. Defense will file every motion imaginable to delay. But with Vance in custody and evidence this strong, they'll probably push for a plea deal." The thought of waiting a year, living in legal limbo, was exhausting. But they'd come this far. They could see it through. Crane arrived that evening, looking more animated than Vaughan had yet seen him. The old journalist settled into a chair with the satisfaction of someone who'd finally closed a chapter that had haunted him for years. "Vance's lawyers are already making noise," Crane reported, "claiming the evidence was obtained illegally, that you broke into private property, that the chain of custody is compromised." Standard defense tactics. "Will it work?" Theo asked. No, Weatherby anticipated all of it. The storage unit was legally purchased. Everything inside became your property, including any documents or information contained within. The estate visit is trickier, but Weatherby's arguing that the evidence would have been inevitably discovered through legal means once the investigation commenced. Crane smiled. "Besides, the court of public opinion has already convicted Vance. No jury will ignore that." "What about the other executives?" Vaughan asked. "Two have already flipped, offering testimony in exchange for reduced sentences. The House of Cards is collapsing faster than even I expected." They talked late into the evening, Crane sharing stories of other investigations, other powerful people brought down by persistence and courage. He'd made a career of it, finding truth, exposing corruption, speaking for those who couldn't speak for themselves. "What Landry did," Crane said quietly, "preserving all those forgotten lives. That's what we all do in our own way. Journalists, historians, even you, with your idea for a memory preservation business. We're all fighting against the ultimate enemy, forgetting, making sure people and truth and justice aren't erased by time or power or convenience." Vaughan thought about Lieutenant Pearson's flight jacket, about Caroline's ring, about every item in Landry's collection. Stories preserved against entropy, against the natural tendency of the universe to forget. "Landry left one more thing," Vaughan said. He retrieved the music box from his bag, wound it carefully, let the haunting melody fill the room. Crane's eyes glistened. "I remember that song. Landry played it for me once when we were working together. Said it was Caroline's favorite. She hummed it constantly, even after the Alzheimer's stole everything else. The melody played out, achingly beautiful. When it finished, silence settled over them. The kind of silence that honors memory, that acknowledges loss, that celebrates love that endures past death." "What will you do with it?" Crane asked. "Return it to the estate, I think. Let it stay where Landry left it, in that room he built for her. It belongs there." "That's right," Crane agreed. "Some things are meant to be kept, not sold." Over the next week they remained in protective custody, while the case against Vance solidified. More co-conspirators were arrested. More victims came forward. The fraud's true scale emerged. $7 billion stolen over a decade, thousands of lives destroyed. Patricia called, somehow getting through to them despite security protocols. Her voice was chastened, almost apologetic. "I saw the news," she said. "I didn't know what you'd found, what you were dealing with. The lawyer stuff, forget it. I'm dropping the claim." "Why?" Vaughan asked, genuinely curious. "Because Theo called me, told me what you did, how you refused $15 million to do the right thing." Told me, her voice cracked, told me that you're the man I married, the one I'd forgotten about, and that I should have stayed, should have helped instead of running. Patricia, I'm not asking to get back together. That's done. But maybe we could be civil. For Theo's sake, he shouldn't have to choose between us. I'd like that, Vaughn said and meant it. After they hung up, Theo appeared from the bedroom. You heard? You called your mother? She deserved to know. And you deserved for her to know what kind of man you are. Theo sat beside his father. I spent so long being angry at both of you. At her for leaving, at you for, I don't know, for not being perfect. But nobody's perfect. And you tried. You kept trying even when everything fell apart. So did you, Vaughn said. Coming back home, helping with the auction, sticking with this even when it got dangerous. You could have walked away at any point. We're a team now. Teams don't walk away. The grand jury returned indictments on all counts. Vance would stand trial in federal court, facing the rest of his life in prison if convicted. His co-conspirators faced similar fates. The victims' fund, established immediately by prosecutors, would eventually return billions to those who'd lost everything. On the 10th day, marshals informed them they could return home. The immediate danger had passed. Vance was locked up, his organization dismantled, his ability to threaten them neutralized. You'll still need security until trial, Weatherby explained when she came to debrief them. But you can resume your lives within reason. No publicity, no media interviews. Stay safe, stay smart. They gathered their few possessions, including the music box carefully wrapped, and prepared to leave the safe house that had been their refuge and prison. At the door, Vaughn paused, looking back at the anonymous apartment where they'd waited out the storm.
Ready?
Theo asked. Yeah, Vaughn said. Let's go home. 3 months later, autumn had painted the world in shades of gold and rust. Vaughn stood in front of a modest storefront on a tree-lined street, watching workers install the sign above the door, Landry Legacy Memory Preservation Services. Theo emerged from inside, paint splattered on his jeans, grinning. The back office is almost done. We can start taking clients next week. The business had been Theo's vision, refined and expanded through countless late-night conversations. They would help families organize, preserve, and share their histories, digitizing photographs, recording oral histories, creating memorial books and videos. Not everyone could afford fancy services, so they'd operate on a sliding scale. Some clients would pay well. Others would pay what they could. The point wasn't profit, though they'd need to sustain themselves. The point was preserving stories that might otherwise be lost. The remaining items from Landry's collection, those they hadn't donated to museums, provided startup capital. Lieutenant Pearson's flight jacket now resided in the National World War II Museum, his story finally told to thousands of visitors. The antique furniture had found homes in historical societies and preservation organizations. Each item had gone where it could do the most good, continue the work Landry had started. They'd kept only a few pieces. Caroline's music box sat on a shelf in the office, a reminder of why they did this work. Some photographs and letters they'd framed, decorating the walls with forgotten faces. People who mattered, who'd lived and loved and deserved to be remembered. Hollis arrived with coffee and pastries, his unofficial role as business advisor already well established. Place looks good. Your mother would be proud. Thanks, Hollis. Vaughn accepted the coffee gratefully. Couldn't have done it without you. Nonsense. You two did the hard part. I just provided moral support and occasionally useful advice. Inside, they settled around a salvaged table that would serve as their conference space. The office was small but warm, filled with light from large windows. Nothing fancy. They couldn't afford fancy yet, but it felt right. Felt like home. Prosecutor called this morning, Vaughn said. Trial's set for January. They're confident Vance will take a plea rather than face a jury. How long would he get? Theo asked. 20 years minimum. He's 62 now, so effectively life. Justice delayed but not denied. The victims' fund had already distributed over $4 billion to those who'd lost money in Vance's scheme. More would follow as assets were liquidated. It wouldn't erase the pain, wouldn't restore the years of struggle and hardship. But it was something. It was acknowledgement that their suffering mattered, that the system, however slowly, could still work. Leopold Crane had written a book about the case, about Landry's heroism and the ordinary carpenter and his son who'd finished what the billionaire started. He'd sent them an advance copy inscribed, "To Vaughn and Theo, proof that courage doesn't require wealth or power, only conscience and determination." The book would publish in spring, with all of Crane's proceeds going to the Victims Fund. Vaughn and Theo had declined any payment for their story. Some things weren't about money. Patricia had visited twice since they'd returned, awkward lunches where they'd navigated the strange territory of divorced parents trying to be civil. She'd remarried, a quiet accountant who made her happy. Vaughn was genuinely pleased for her. The anger that had poisoned their relationship for years had finally dissipated, leaving only the bittersweet recognition of what they'd once shared and why it had ended. "I have a surprise," Theo announced, pulling out his laptop. "Our first official client." He turned the screen to show an email from an elderly woman in the suburbs. Her husband had recently passed, leaving boxes of letters from his service in Korea, photographs spanning 60 years of marriage, and countless stories she wanted preserved before her own memory failed. "I told her we'd visit next week," Theo said. "Take preliminary recordings, assess the materials, put together a preservation plan." Vaughn felt emotion well up unexpectedly. This was it, the beginning of something meaningful. "Let's make sure we do right by her." "We will. That's the whole point." They spent the afternoon finalizing office setup, testing equipment, practicing their intake procedures. Hollis offered suggestions born from decades in business. By evening, exhausted but satisfied, they stood on the sidewalk outside, admiring their work. "Dad," Theo said quietly, "thank you." "For what?" "For taking that risk at the auction. For refusing Vance's money. For showing me that some things are worth fighting for, even when it's terrifying." He paused. "I was lost before all this. Didn't know who I was or what I wanted. Now I do." Vaughn pulled his son into an embrace. "We found our way together. That's what matters." They locked up and walked to Vaughn's truck, the same battered vehicle that had carried them to that first auction, to Landry's estate, through everything that followed. He'd thought about replacing it with something newer, more reliable. But the truck had become part of their story now. It had earned its place. At home, a better apartment now, 2 bedrooms with actual space. Vaughn found himself drawn to the photograph he'd framed and hung above his desk. Landry and Caroline, young and in love, the whole world ahead of them. Below it he'd placed the inscription from her ring, "Forever isn't long enough." His phone buzzed. Text from Ann Weatherby. "Vance accepted plea deal. 25 years, no parole. Justice served." Vaughn stared at the message, feeling the weight of months lifting. It was done. Not just the legal case, but the journey that had started with a desperate bid on a storage unit and led them here, to purpose, to reconciliation, to a future that felt worth building. He thought about Landry, alone in that mansion, preserving memories because he couldn't preserve the one person he loved most. The billionaire had died without knowing if his evidence would ever see daylight, if justice would ever come, if his life's work mattered. But it had mattered. It had changed everything, for the victims who'd gotten some measure of restitution, for Vaughn and Theo, who'd found each other again, for everyone who'd been touched by the story of the man who collected lives so they wouldn't be forgotten. Theo appeared in the doorway. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," Vaughn smiled. "Everything's going to be fine." They made dinner together, an easy routine they'd developed over recent months. Simple food, simple conversation, the comfortable silence of people who no longer needed to fill every moment with words. After dishes were done, they sat on the small balcony, watching the city lights flicker to life as darkness fell. The air was crisp with approaching winter, but not yet cold. Somewhere below, life continued. People coming home from work, families gathering, the endless human drama of existence. "Think Landry would be happy?" Theo asked. "With how things turned out?" Vaughn considered. "I think he'd be satisfied. Justice done, stories preserved, two strangers finding purpose through his legacy. Yeah, I think he'd be happy. Good. Thea was quiet for a moment. I miss Mom tonight. Wish she could see this. She can, Vaughn said with certainty. She's in every good choice we make, every kind thing we do. That's how we keep her alive, by living the values she taught us. They sat together as stars emerged, father and son, bound by love and loss, and the strange fortune that had brought them to this moment. The vault's treasure had been real, the antiques and artwork and historical artifacts. But the true wealth they'd discovered couldn't be measured in dollars or locked away in storage. It was this, connection restored, purpose found. The knowledge that they'd stood up when they could have stayed down. Spoken truth when silence would have been easier. Chosen principle over profit and dignity over wealth. Forever isn't long enough, but while you have it, you make every moment count. And that, Vaughn thought as the city lights glowed below them, was a fortune no one could ever take away.